Hi there, welcome back to the channel and the video. So I thought today that I would give you a little bit of an update on how things are going for my Test of Honor collection. Now I could have easily just built up and painted some more Ashigaru, and don't get me wrong, those are certainly on the list, but instead I figured we'd go a little bit more out there, and so I've picked up some Onna Bugeisha from Warlord Games, and I thought we could give those a try. So a little while back I picked up the box of 10 Onna Bugeisha from Warlord Games that are advertised for Warlords of Erewhon but have no fantasy elements to them, so perfect for Test of Honor. Or at least so I thought. Here we are with the minis, and yeah, the details on these faces is, well, basically non-existent, which is really disappointing for 28mm scale models. But okay, benefit of the doubt, maybe the sculpts were a little older, or the molds from this batch were wearing a little thin. I don't know, they are what they are, and it's going to give me a challenge to try and get something out of them at least. And I'm going to start painting same way as I have with the Uesugi, where I'm using contrast paints, and some of the conventional wisdom tells us that painting from the inside out is always a good idea, and I'm actually going to follow that this time, at least sort of, for the skin. So I want to block in those areas that are skin, which are the aforementioned face, or more accurately, the area where the face should be, and the hands. That was pretty much it, but considering the challenges that I knew I would face with the faces, I wanted to get them blocked in early so I could see what I was working with, make sure to avoid them with any other paints, and possibly start to get some ideas of what I could do with them. In the last Test of Honor video, I painted up the miniatures as Uesugi samurai, and as we're moving on to the clothes, it's worth thinking about who these women are going to be. And well, I don't want to just bring you the same painting video twice but on different models, and what better opponent to have for them than, of course, the Takeda. So that's the colour scheme we're going to be going with. I'm going to be painting the main cloth parts as black, a possible deliberate contrast to the white and light grey of the previous models. I'd also recommend going and checking out the video on how I painted up the Uesugi Samurai previously, if you haven't already, because, you know, this is YouTube and I have to say those sorts of things. The big thing that I want to talk about is the armour. Now, I know that most people have either, by this point, experience with contrast paint or have at the very least seen videos of them used extensively. But for myself, I'm still in the experimenting phase of trying these out. And I wanted to mention about this one in particular, the Blood Angels Red is absolutely amazing. I love it. They're such a lovely colour. It's so vibrant on a single coat, nice and smooth, you know, 10 out of 10, no notes, absolutely love it. But while painting this armour, I discovered another problem with the minis and the sculpts themselves, or with the casts, or whatever the reason might be, that I hadn't considered before. The armour is, in a more subtle way, just as lacking in detail as the faces. There are seemingly some details, but honestly now that I'm painting it, they're pretty shallow, and in particular the edges of them are really soft, meaning that as I'm painting these, I just know that they're going to be a bit of a challenge to pick out and highlight. I can't necessarily rely on edge highlighting as easily as I might have done with other minis, but this is a problem that I'm going to come back to later on in the video. But with the three main contrast paints down on the model, I'm now going to come back in with some normal acrylics and spend a bit of time tidying up what I need to. I can do that with another three colours, so that's just a black, a brown and a white, which I just use depending on what colour is going to be over the top. So for my metals, I always find that they look better with a dark base coat, so that might, you know, maybe more be that it just helps the colour look more solid in less coats than actually looks better. But that's, you know, that's how it works. So for the steels, I'm going to be using a black, and for the gold trim on the weapons, I'm going to be using a brown. I also particularly found that I needed to tidy up the lacing on the armour plates that I wanted to have as a leather colour. This is where it's useful to remember that if you do mess up with contrast paints, it's okay. The paint isn't permanent and you can easily paint over it. If, like me, you notice that you've gone over part that you maybe shouldn't have, but just keep going. It's an easy thing to fix, and there's a bit of a trade-off with doing this. You'll notice that I lose a bit of the zenithal highlighting, zenithal shading that I do on my models before starting, but for the straps and the like, honestly, they're such a minor part of the model. It's fine to lose that little bit of detail. It doesn't detract from the models really at all, particularly as I'm aiming for these to be to a tabletop standard. From that, I can go in and add in those mentioned metals and leather detailing at this point. I think I've got a pretty solid looking Takeda model, and yes, before anybody mentions it in the comments, I do know that some people will say, okay, clan colours weren't typically that overt in this sort of time period, they weren't as standardised or anything close to the idea of clans all wearing the same colour just didn't really happen, and I know that. But I think it looks a lot cooler to have each side of a game look more unified. It makes it easier to quickly get a sense of how things are going during a game on the tabletop. But I would really like to know your opinion on this down in the comments. Where do you stand on the accuracy versus aesthetic debate? How much does keeping true to history matter to you, or do you just paint what looks fun to you? For these minis, the black and the leathers are going to be highlighted with just a lighter shade of the same colours, so I won't linger on them too much, but I do want to discuss a little bit about my choice for the armour, because red can be a tricky colour to highlight, in that you could go one of two ways, and you have to be a little bit careful with either choice. You can highlight up to either a fiery red by going more into the orange side of the colour spectrum. This does have advantages. It does keep the colours more saturated, but I don't think I want to, for these models at least, go with a more orangey red colour. Instead, I went with mixing white into the red paint, which, as you may already know or be able to pretty quickly guess, shifts the red into a pink. Given that I've decided to do this for the minis using red pink to try and highlight the quote-unquote edges, or failing that, just kind of try and draw a thin and as straight a possible line where the edges actually should be. And I had to think carefully with this because pink can very quickly overpower the red, and then the armour starts to look pink, which for a stylized Takeda force, that's, I want red, not pink basically. If there's any tip that I can give in this video, it's to consider that when highlighting red, less is always more. One of the things that I love about the painting hobby is that you really do get to see how your skills are progressing, and that for me has definitely been in the further refinement of how I paint skin tones, in particular Asian ones. I started this channel back 7+ months ago, and basically painting Asian skin tones how I would paint Caucasian skin, and not being happy with the outcome. I have refined that a little bit, well, quite a bit since then, and by the point of the Uesugi video, I really felt that I was getting there in terms of the colour palette that I should be using, but still not liking that I was seeing quite big jumps from the shades to the mid up to those final highlights with the normal acrylics. And this time around I've experimented a bit more by mixing in a tanned flesh colour into the pale to give it a more subtle highlight than just stark pale flesh. And I do find that that helps it to blend better with the contrast paint base coats below. That said, I know I've mentioned it multiple times by now, but these faces are so difficult. Luckily, I've seen a lot of human faces, as I'm sure you have as well, and I was able to paint highlights where roughly they should go, so the nose, the cheeks, the forehead and the chin are the areas that I always find are best to focus on. You should know that I don't think it's half bad. It's not amazing, but it's close enough, particularly for tabletop standard. And trust yourself, if you find you've got minis like this, go ahead, give it a go. I think you would be surprised at how close you can actually get you'll probably find that you're happy with your results as well. Well, we're coming on to the final aspect of the minis now, and that is the bases. For the bases, I have gone with my typical Geek Gaming Scenics base ready range. Use this on all my models basically at this point. Absolutely love the stuff. Really simple, just cover the base in PVA, dunk it in this, let it sit there for a little bit to really sort of soak into that PVA and grab on, then take it out of the bag, tap a little bit off and let it dry. Or at least that is part of the process and what I've shown in previous videos. I think I do want to mention this time though is sealing that down afterwards. And the way that you do that is by kind of effectively going over with another coat of PVA. But a couple of little additions. So what I like to do is I like to get a pipette and some isopropyl alcohol first. A couple of drops on there once the first layer of PVA is completely dry and the basing material is stuck down. That'll just help with the capillary action and helping the second layer absorb in. For that second layer as well, I also use the matte scenic sealant from Geek Gaming Scenics. Use that because, well, clues in the name a little bit that it's matte, and I really like to have a matte finish on my models, and I don't want to be having gloss on the base when the models above it are ultra matte. The Geek Gaming Scenics, the bottle does come with its own applicator, squirty nozzle type thing. For basing, however, I would not recommend that. Grab your pipette that you've been using for the isopropyl alcohol, unscrew the lid, grab a little bit with that and just drop a couple of droplets on. You use far less, there's far less wastage, and to be perfectly honest, it's a lot cleaner. If you don't have a dedicated painting desk like myself, trust me, any partners or parents or anything like that, they're not going to appreciate you spraying a load of PVA glue all over the dining room table or something. So pipette, definitely the way to go. Although do get quite a long one, particularly as these bottles start to run out. A smaller one's not going to reach the bottom and you're going to try and tip it over a little bit to try and get at the liquid. You're going to have a bad time. With that, we've got the miniatures painted up, and I'll show you some photos of those coming up in a minute. But first of all, I've got a little bit of a surprise for you. Now, you may have noticed that earlier on, the box of these miniatures does come in a set of 10, and we've only painted up 5 here today. And that's because I haven't ignored the Uesugi half of my collection as well, and I've actually painted up 5 for those too. Here are some photos so you can see how they came out. I painted them up using my previous Uesugi video, and I'm really happy with how they came out. Again, just a reminder, go and maybe check out that video after this if you are interested in seeing the techniques that I did for those. Now, same problem as with the Takeda, that the details are on the chunkier and slightly softer side. So some of the highlights I did have to just paint in rather than relying on edge highlighting. And that has caused a problem where I do think some of the highlights were maybe a little bit chunkier than I intended. But still, solid tabletop miniatures that I can add to the collection, and I'm close to now having painted everything that I need for a fully painted game. And the last thing I do want to do though is I do want to add in some terrain for this collection, specifically some Japanese style houses, and I do have a video coming out soon on how I'm going to be getting that up. If you want to see that and any other videos that I have coming out in the near future, then do be sure to hit that subscribe button down below for Tabletop Sagas. I do have quite a few videos that are in the pipeline at the minute, as I've been jumping around a lot of different projects and they're all finally starting to come to a head. So hoping that I'll get those out pretty soon and that'll be something for you to enjoy. But with that, I'll just say thank you for coming and hanging out with me today. I always appreciate your time, and without any further ado, here are my Takeda Onna Bugeisha.